3, 2, 1, go.
Guys, we did it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you believe it? Finally. After
We cured cancer.
Oh, no, that's not what I was going to say.
Oh.
Well, what do you have that's that important?
That's such a fucking dark turn.
That's not dark. That's a brilliant light of hope.
What's your
To
good
cure
news, man?
cancer.
I was going to say we killed the summer heat.
Oh.
That's so much worse.
That'll
Well,
help
you just
people.
said it's bad that we cured cancer.
No.
This is number 2 behind incest.
Welcome
for
back
you.
to Maggie's Cool Opinions.
Oh my God.
Yeah, what a hot take.
I was gonna say when we started our summer ween series back in June, Cam, where we were trying to, counteract the death heat of summer in Texas, and it's by talking about horror. And finally, after 5 hard months of working, the cold winter has come to Texas. And it's thrilling, and I'm impressed that we finally did that.
You're right. That's a medical breakthrough that's going to change a lot of lives.
That's way
agree.
better than what I said.
We should really
I
discuss
apologize
our intros
for stepping on your toes.
before we do this. Well, welcome back to the Curing Cancer podcast. I'm your host.
So we're doing a discussion episode today.
We're not going to talk about any of that.
Thank you for that illustrious intro, Maggie. So
I blame Tristan for all of that.
This is
Oh my God.
I pulled that out of the fire.
I don't know why.
He did. He saved your bacon there. So we're talking about art that we've changed our mind about. This is a topic we kind of floated between us a couple weeks ago. And because it's the biggest topic in the world, you could literally do a whole podcast just within that idea. We'll probably do multiple episodes with it, but for this first one, we've just got one example each, and we're going to go around and sort of explain what the work of art is. I'll make sure they're all featured in the episode artwork, so you can kind of see a little shortcut of what we're saying.
And we can post links in this description with
Of course.
full, nice images of everything. Should we all share what we're going to talk about?
No.
Or keep the listener in suspense.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
The
one of
tease.
us will, in fact, cure cancer. We'll find out.
You've changed your
That's
mind.
the art that I changed my mind on.
Actually, it's a good thing. I changed my mind. Why is this the direct? No, take me seriously. Well, yeah.
Maggie is actually a dynamic character. We are static, and this is just about her growth.
This is all about me. Yeah.
That was very Jeb Bush, just speaking your subconscious.
No. Well,
Seriously? I mean, it's so cloying.
Email in saying you respect me.
Like and subscribe.
all right. While we're at it, yeah, you should like and subscribe. You can get in touch with us at secondbreakfastpod at gmail.com or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or Substack. All the fun things.
So what's the work of art you changed your mind about, Maggie?
So, well, when you suggested this prompt, I had a big old think, because I've changed my mind about lots of things over lots of periods of time, and I feel like what we talk about a lot on this show is a lot of movies and a lot of books and TV shows, and that's all great and very important. But I was like, we don't talk enough about, like the art that I studied at school, and like when you say the word art, what people think about, like paintings and stuff. So I thought I'd go that direction, because I've had a lot of mind changes and opinion changes about those things over time. So I decided to. Why are you looking at me like that?
No, I'm in good spirits.
Okay, I thought you were making fun
Maggie, I
of me.
can't see you.
Oh, that wasn't for you.
Tell me you respect me. Tell me I'm doing a good job.
So I decided I wanted to talk about a Picasso painting as a way to sort of frame a larger discussion. But so the painting I'm thinking of is Pablo Picasso's Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is a painting from 1907, and it shows 5 nude women sort of in this configuration, and they look very Picasso, they look very weird and funky. Y'all should actually, maybe you should
Now,
look at.
when you say configuration, are we talking like human centipede?
No,
Or-
they're kind of standing. It's like 4 of them are standing kind of next to each other, sort of posing in different ways. And there's one who's kind of crouched below them, or in front of them. I was gonna say y'all can pull up a picture while I'm talking. if
I'm
you'd like to
gonna
look at
do
it.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
What's it? How, now
Ooh.
do attempt to spell that for me.
Demois Demoiselles ELLES D apostrophe AVIGNON.
What do you know? It's the first thing that comes
All
up.
right, there you go. But so, it's this, when I first saw it, I was like, first of all, I was like, ugly, right? It's incredibly ugly. And that's, sorry, that's objective. It's ugly. Which is funny because I'm
the painting or what it depicts?
The painting.
Do you mean like the way it's done? Like the way he's painted?
I think women are ugly.
Like Maggie is also anti-women.
I don't know if you mean like the people or the way he's applied the paint to the canvas.
It's the like just the style. It is not, and I mean, look it up. Look at it while I'm
No,
talking.
I've seen it. I'm just trying to.
It's not a good looking painting. I don't like the style. I don't like the colors. I'm unsettled by the facial expressions of the women. I just don't like it. And I should give some context. So in school, I studied art history, and I focused on medieval art. And I've never been a big modern art person. When I say modern, I mean 20th century on. I've never been no, that's important to define.
No, I know. You made a funny face when you did that. It was very snobbish.
Well, thanks. I've never been into modern art just because, I don't know, I'm much more into things that are from a longer time ago because I find that more interesting. And I find a lot of modern art to be just, or I used to find it to be very irksome and trying too hard and annoying and tired, just with everybody trying to do new things, and I used to be really bored by that. And I felt like this painting really exemplified why I didn't like modern art, because I didn't think it was interesting. I thought it was ugly. I thought it was like, oh, more nude women, ooh, how exciting. Like, I was so tired of that, like, especially because it's done in this fragmented, not naturalistic way. So it felt very like one-dimensional to me, of like, oh, he's doing nude women but in a different way. Like, I was very underwhelmed and annoyed by that, basically. And it wasn't until I had to teach art history classes to undergraduates we had to teach modern art that I started to actually be really interested in it. And it's still like not my favorite area, but I think it's so interesting to talk about, because it's when you understand the context that it really starts to change. Because this is 1907, right? And somebody doing something that's like really abstracted or fragmented or intentionally not naturalistic is like not interesting, because people have been doing that for over 100 years. But back then that was really groundbreaking, and I don't think I fully understood how special that was. Sorry, I had tea. The tea is messing with me.
Yes, historically a thick beverage.
I don't know, but I think that's because of the honey. I don't know, but
just heavy cream, 1 drop of tea.
Oh yeah, milkshake. No, but so I've always liked Impressionism and stuff from the 19th century. Like, that's always really like, because that's just like beautiful, right? Like, it's like, you think about Monet, you think about the post-Impressionists of Van Gogh, like all of that stuff is gorgeous.
Romantic and
yes, and there's nature, and it's like beautiful in that way, in a way that anybody who doesn't know a thing about art can appreciate. And then when you get into the context and understand that the Impressionists were really trying to be groundbreaking and do these new things and go against the academic standards that had been set by the Académie des Beaux-Arts, which was like the like main French academy of art, and like the arbiter of what art is supposed to be and what is good art. The Impressionists are really going against that, and that was very revolutionary. And they were doing things and including working class people in their images, and including like talking about social issues, and not just doing paintings of gods and
beautiful people.
Yeah, beautiful rich people or religion. So they were doing things that were really different. And if you think about that as the precursor to people in the 20th century, like Picasso, or those who came after him, they're continuing those trends of doing new things and trying new things and going against tradition. And that was very bold for the time. And I think that's helpful context. You also think about Cubism, which is what Picasso is doing, and those who come after him with the Surrealists and the Abstract Expressionists. It's very much a reaction to World War I and just the absolute turmoil that caused globally, at least in the West, and the way that it just completely changed how people felt about the world. It created this sense of like nihilism and hopelessness and confusion and fear. And so people were just kind of being like, well, nothing means anything anymore. So nothing matters. So we're just going to do, you know, all this crazy stuff with art. And that's really simplifying it. But just understanding all of that context made me re-look at something like this painting. And it is, I still find it very ugly. But I realized after teaching this to students that that's not a bad thing, and that it's meant to be provocative. It's meant to be like, yeah, not all art has to be beautiful and like aesthetically pleasing and correct, and you know, it doesn't have to be just beautiful to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be didactic. It doesn't have to be any of these things that it's been before. It can just be, I'm playing around with forms. I'm inspired by these masks that I've seen from indigenous cultures in Africa, because if you look at a lot of those faces, they look a lot like African masks, and that was very intentional. He was really interested in that, and you can unpack all the colonial stuff that has to do with that, but that's not what I'm getting into here. That's not the point. But just this interest in fragmentation of form and distorting what we're used to seeing, and making us, like, provoking us to have a reaction, is something that hadn't been done in that way before, and that's pretty revolutionary and interesting. And I liked to use this painting with my students when I was teaching and be like, and I would ask them, like, do y'all like this? And there'd always be someone who they're like looking around, and I'm like, it's okay if you don't. And they'd be like, oh yeah, no, I hate it. And I was like, great, let's talk about why. And I found that
she said, you better not like it. Someone don't like it, or else this class doesn't work. Honestly, it's pretty bold, you know, given the subjectivity of art.
But like, you know, because I feel like we're so used to being like, oh, well, this is what the artist did, and oh, isn't it so brilliant and beautiful, and oh yeah, like we're all supposed to think the same thing. And I was like, no, like the point of 20th century art is that people will disagree, and that some people can find it like they don't like it, or they're uncomfortable with it, or that it makes them question a lot of things, or you might say, I don't think this is good art. And that in and of itself is a wonderful reaction, because it creates conversations.
What is art? What is good art?
Exactly.
What does it mean if an artist is trying to be unappealing or trying to be inaccessible?
Right. Or, you know, then you can talk about Dada and the fountain, and which is the urinal sculpture. Right. And asking, is that art? That's a wonderful conversation.
Like just open provocations.
Exactly. Yeah. So I now I look at that painting and I find it so, I love looking at it, even though I still find it incredibly ugly. I love looking at it, and I love thinking about what it means. And now that thing is over 100 years old. Which is really wild to think about. So yeah, I was so, I don't know. I wanted to think about that in the way I think about modern art now. And I've said before, I work in an art museum, and so I use a lot of modern art in my job. And again, it's not my favorite thing, but it creates great conversations. So I find it really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. Cam, have you seen that painting before, right?
I think so.
What do you think? Do you like it?
I mean, I've seen the photos just to look up for this episode.
Yeah, I
thought you meant in person.
No. It's at the MoMA. If anybody's curious, but yeah, have you? You've seen just an image of it before?
Yeah. I mean, I always like Picasso. I like the stuff that's ugly on
that's
purpose
true.
and hard to get a hold on. I like anything that bucks like the house style. I've noticed that with movies. I think we tend to like. I mean, all three of us tend to like the horror movies that are kind of not what you're expecting, that buck whatever trend is happening. I like that with comics. Anytime an artist breaks from a house style and does something distinctive that other people call ugly or amateurish. I talked about this with Tim Sale with Batman the Long Halloween. It's very expressive and strange and individual. Doesn't look like any other artist, and I think that's by far the most fascinating. I've never not enjoyed looking at a Picasso or a Van Gogh. Those are kind of my guys. These last couple of years.
Even though they're doing things very differently,
but they have that same piqued interest, and I think they're questioning everything that they're painting. Yeah, which gives you things to chew on. It's not just another landscape or another beautiful couple. Like, I know this is factually wrong, but none of their paintings feel like commissions. They all feel like ideas they're trying to work through. Sure. And I think that I mean, it's just catnip for me in a museum.
Yeah, that makes sense. Tristan, had you seen that before?
No, I haven't seen it before, but and while I don't look at that and think that it's immediately aesthetically appealing. I think there's an interesting storyline, at least in my head, that it and again I'm looking at it with modern eyes, but the with the one in the middle sort of being the ideal and all of the other ones having something wrong with them, attempting to sort of match what she looks like, but not quite being able to measure up to that. I don't know. It's interesting visually to me, but I don't look at it and go, wow, that's like, I don't just want to stare at it for forever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, because especially the way that I'm not looking at an image right now, but one of them is like staring right at us, and it's in this really like confrontational way. And it makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I don't think that it makes me uncomfortable. I mean, to me, what I'm seeing is like there is an idealized image that the others are having. It's impossible for them to match, and that is the gist to me. I mean, from the line work to like the way the lines are perfectly done to the proportions of the person, like it makes sense that that's being intentionally, your eye is intentionally drawn to her, and everything else sort of pales in comparison. So,
and the fact that when you look at it, you think of the painting as being ugly. You use that word when you're introing it, Maggie, and that you see all of these women looking at each other, like they are in conversation with each other in the same way we are putting the painting in conversation with all of these other paintings of women and figures. Right. So he's almost hosting that debate for us.
Yeah, totally.
That's a fun painting.
Yeah, it is fun, and I won't continue because we could continue, but I know y'all have yours things to talk about. Sure. But if you haven't seen it, listener, go take a look at it and embrace how weird it makes you feel, because it makes me feel really weird. But I like it a lot. I wouldn't want this in my home, but well, if it was the original, then yeah, I guess I fucking would. But you know what I'm saying. I wouldn't like print this out and put it in my home, but because it creeps me out. But it's really cool. So
cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
How about you, Tristan? What you got?
For my piece this time, I also sort of was inspired, like Maggie was, to go look elsewhere other than just TV and movies, which is funny because that's what we do. But then the first thing that we thought of when Cam said, just what art have you changed your mind on? My head immediately went not only to a traditional art form, in this case a sculpture, but to this one specifically. This was the first thing that I thought within a second of him floating this topic. So the piece that I wanted to talk about today was Cellini's Perseus. It is a bronze sculpture of Perseus, the Greek hero, having slain Medusa and holding her head up in one hand, and like he's got his foot on her body in the other, sort of having triumphed over her. And it's a very famous statue, but so let me describe to you how I originally thought about it. So that's the gist. Actually, I guess it's instructive to have a little bit of a history on the myth too, to sort of get where that's coming from. So Perseus, famous Greek hero, he's best known for, and he and Medusa are very interrelated because of the myth that they're both most known for, is where he was tasked with going and killing her to bring back her head as a trophy. I won't get too much into the reasons why he went, but ultimately he has to go and claim her head, and he gets a bunch of help from different gods to do it. He gets this sickle from Hermes. He has an invisibility cap from Hades. There's a couple. He gets Athena guides him while he's doing the whole endeavor. So like this is a divinely warranted task that he goes and he accomplishes with their help. And so he's tasked with going and killing her and beheading her and bringing the head back in a magic bag. and so the way he does it is probably the most ignoble way one could kill anything. She's asleep. Because the whole thing with Medusa, right, is that if you look at her in the face, she's going to turn you to stone. So to get around this, he goes while she's sleeping, and he doesn't look at her directly because her head is like made of snakes, and they're still up and about, and they can still turn you to stone. So he has this bronze shield that he looks at her through the reflection in that shield, and that's when he uses that sickle and cuts off her head and wins, right? It's a divinely ordained victory that he had all of the cheat codes in the world for, but he won. And then he escapes because Hades' invisibility cap sort of protects him from the other Gorgons. So Medusa is a Gorgon, and there are 3 of them. There are 2 other ones there that he escaped from because he was invisible. So a lot of divine help there, but he escapes and he ultimately triumphs over something that he really should not have, as a mortal, as a human being, won against. So there's a lot of themes with the story. And whenever I first saw this, I remember specifically the first time that I saw it, I was in a mythology class in like freshman year of undergrad. And at the time, I was feeling like there were a lot of obstacles that were in my way personally, stuff that I had to overcome in order like to get to the next step, and just so many different facets of my life at that point in time. And I drew a lot of inspiration from this sculpture, just because the way he's standing, like he's got the sickle or the sword in hand, looking down over an issue or a problem that he ultimately surmounted and overcame, and he's holding the head as a trophy, as like a symbol of having claimed that victory. So I drew a lot of inspiration from that. That was actually my phone background for the longest time. I don't know if you guys remember that.
I don't, but that's cool.
Yeah, it was. And so it was a big deal for me for a long time. And, I had gone years without really seeing it or thinking about it. So that would have been in about 2015 that I developed that opinion of it. Like recently in the last year or two, I looked at the statue again, and I just felt myself having a completely visceral reaction in a negative way about the statue, because it's really hard for me now to divorce the statue from the modern sensibilities of men constantly having women underfoot and not letting them up, and being quote unquote the victor in the game of life, misogyny and all of that.
Yeah, listener, if you're not looking at the sculpture, he's like standing on her decapitated body.
Yeah,
it's fine.
And so where before I was able to look at it symbolically, as if Medusa signified a near insurmountable odd that you needed to pull out all of the stops to actually overcome, and it made it all the more sweet for having done so. Now I look at it and I think, well, shit, she was asleep. You literally had a god help you. And what did she do to you?
Yeah.
He was tasked with going and killing her and essentially bringing her head back as a trophy. And so there's not a lot of sport in the fact that she was asleep. He didn't do it of his own, power, really. She didn't do anything to him personally, other than be born with the unfortunate power of turning people into stone, and happen to also be a woman or a female. And historically, in Greek mythology, there is a a very negative light cast on most female characters, or figures throughout Greek mythology.
Yeah.
One prominent exception being Athena, but that's a totally other thing. You get me talking about Greek mythology, I could do it forever. But now it's really, really difficult for me to unsee the image of man keeping woman down, having killed the woman, being proud of it, at her expense and for no reason, obviously the through lines. I don't have to explain why that feels real and raw today. But I don't really know. Maybe I became a better person or a more a more empathetic person in the time since I saw that. And like there's still a part of me that gleans that from this art, right? That it still is symbolic of triumph. But thinking about seeing this as if I were a woman, I don't know that I would be able to glean that positive message from this. I don't know if I'm able to look past the negativity of that image of a man, quite, basically a celebration of violence, right? Because not only is for all of the reasons I said before, is it sort of a shitty thing that he did to her, apart from her being dead. At the end of it, she's also, her body's naked, right? Like it's still like in the Greek, canon of having a really divinely ideal body. Both Perseus and Medusa have one, but hers is sort of perverted because she's naked, but she's all crumbled up.
Yeah,
and her head is off, obviously, and you can see entrails coming out of her neck. It's actually a really visceral statue if you look at it that way. If you're looking at it anatomically, or as if that were a real person, it's pretty violent.
Yeah.
But it's just really, really hard now to have the prominent feeling that I have whenever I look at it be one of positivity. With how prevalent we know domestic violence is, and the issue with misogyny generally throughout our culture, and just the antiquated depictions that we've grown used to, and our generation and people that have been born in the last 20 years, sort of understand and look at and go, okay, well, that's wrong. But people in the hundreds of years prior to that had to do all of the work to get us to the point where that's just obvious now. Right. And I think all of that work that they've put in, that I've put in, makes it difficult to have a mostly positive view of the work.
That's really interesting. I that's a cool, interesting journey to describe. Have you seen, I'm sure you have you, when you look at imagery of David holding the head of Goliath, does that give you similar feelings of triumph and victory and overcoming an obstacle without the ickiness of misogyny?
Oh, let me see this.
I mean,
know about...
it's obviously there's the biblical religious connotation, and that kind of connotation can have a lot of negative things.
Well, no, because so I'm looking at these images right now. The reason that the Perseus statue specifically evoked that emotion for me is because he just looks really cool doing it.
I mean, he does look really cool.
The way his head's down, as if he's just sort of basking in what he did, it having been a hard-won victory. That's what I gleaned from it initially, right? When you really look into the myth and how he was able to do these things, it's way less epic, right? Yeah. But it depends on the way that the David and Goliath would be depicted. Well, sure. If it is a cool image.
Well, yeah, because the other thing is this Perseus is this idealized masculine man. David is a young boy, except except for Michelangelo's David, who's not even holding the head; he's just holding the stone. There's no victory. It's before the moment of victory. Except for that David, most Davids are young and boyish and don't look nearly as cool as Perseus does. So that makes total sense.
But also, I will say I've never quite connected as much with biblical imagery as I have with Greek mythological imagery.
Yeah.
And I don't, other than me being just an unsavable heathen, I spent a lot of time whenever I was younger, reading, the illustrated mythology books and stuff. I'm sure you know exactly the one that I'm talking about.
The yellow one?
The yellow one with the chariot, the Apollo's chariot in front of it. Yeah, that one. And so I read that and a bunch of other ones, and I was fascinated by that whenever I was young, and still am, obviously. But so I never even really drew that comparison, despite them being effectively the same, the same moral, the same gist exists in both.
Totally.
But David was never like cool.
I mean, well, yeah, again, he's a young boy, and it's like he doesn't do this amazing. He cuts the head off after Goliath's dead. He kills him with a slingshot. And
Yeah,
then cuts the
see,
head
that's
off.
lame.
So it's like even lamer than her being asleep. So
Yeah.
it's not even as cool. So,
But I like that it's the spin that the sculptor is putting on this story that strikes you wrong, that it looks like he's flaunting it, that he's, dancing in the end zone. I wonder if there are other representations of this moment and if they'd all hit you the same way.
I mean, there are tons of representations of that moment. What do you mean?
No, I mean that he's seen or has an opinion about.
I can't really think of. I mean, because this is the one, right?
Yeah,
like
that's
this is
the
like
one.
this is. I mean, there's plenty of depictions. I mean, there are other depictions, obviously, but like that's just what I think of. And I'm looking at like a Roman style or just a marble statue that's white doing the same thing, and like that doesn't look as good. And Medusa's face is very sad in that one. I mean, I think that's pretty, it's harder to feel. I don't know that I would have had that immediate feeling about it then if her face looked like that. But like in Cellini's, they essentially have the same facial expression. And it makes sense that it's very solemn. It makes sense that hers would be that way because she was asleep.
Right.
So it's just, and some of them are more violent that I'm seeing. I'm scrolling through some right now, but I mean, I don't think any of them are as evocative
Yeah.
for me as that one.
Because he's giving a heroic posture to something that upon reflection you don't see at all as heroic. Like the way you were describing the scene made me think of our House of the Dragon conversations when we were talking about Macbeth, because you were talking about killing someone when they were asleep, and I was thinking of Macbeth killing King Duncan when he's asleep. But in every version of that play I've ever seen, that is the most shameful moment of the play. Like, I can't imagine someone making a statue of Macbeth killing Duncan in his sleep. I love that same story in this different context someone would ever think to represent heroically and majestically.
Yeah. Well, also
That's
it
fascinating.
helps that it's like this Baroque sculpture. Baroque is very like dramatic and theatrical,
But it's a celebration. There's
Yes.
this, I mean, even making it so tall, there's this idolatry and there's a forced perspective on it where it is so much larger and huger and more impressive than you.
yeah.
That's so interesting.
There is an artist now named Luciano Garbati who did this sort of counter example where it's Medusa holding the head of Perseus as sort of like what you're talking about, Tristan, like sort of like this payback for all of it. I don't think it's particularly great, like artistically, like it's fine. And it's not nearly as like dynamically gorgeous as this Cellini sculpture.
You know what? I think
But
I've
it's pretty
seen
cool.
this. I've seen it before.
Yeah.
And, I didn't like it. I remember the first time seeing it, I didn't like it because, I don't remember when I saw it, but I'm sure initially I would have been like, well, that's not the one that I like. That don't pervert it.
That's not it.
Because I think back in the time, I knew that you could see it that way, right? I knew that it could be, if we view it through a feminist lens, like it's a bad, shitty representation in art. But back then, I think I took the opinion that, well, who gives a shit? I'm getting this positive feeling out of that, and obviously, if you view this sculpture that was made in the 16th century with modern proclivities, you're going to come to a different conclusion.
Yeah.
Right. Just as I have. Right. But back then I was like, just, obviously it doesn't comport with a lot of our modern ideals, but you can find something positive in it. And I still think that. I still think you can.
Yeah.
Especially, if you dig symbologically, and allow it to just be a representation of triumph
Right.
over some sort of seemingly insurmountable obstacle. But I can't now get past the personification of that
Right.
obstacle as a woman.
Sure. Yeah.
This is reminding me a little bit of the Picasso conversation.
Mm-hmm.
That idea of being sort of an open provocation. The way you're framing this, Tristan, it's made me think about sculpture in a way I don't usually think about sculpture, but as almost a storytelling medium, as a way to adapt and represent part of a story. Because all of that framing we just talked about of Perseus being huge and impressive and with his chest out and proud and heroic, representing him like that, if you have any awareness of the myth going into the museum or wherever you're seeing it, it does almost demand that you reconsider your opinion of him. Because if you do see him as a hero, you're right with it. But if you have any other impression of him as a character, you're going to grate against that representation. So it's almost like it's I mean, nothing is necessarily the artist's opinion of the work, but I like that it's almost constructed like it's Perseus's opinion of the situation. It's a subjective framing of that story because, of course, he would see that moment as being a heroic achievement against all odds.
Yes.
It's so interesting because we see these things, especially when they're divorced from context and culture and no one knows the myth, I assume. They're not... All they're seeing is a guy like, oh, those kind of look like abs. But there's so... Like, we see it as just objective. Like, oh, this is how it was. Maybe he was a real guy. This was how he was back then. But like it's hopelessly subjective, obviously, like every work of art. It feels I mean, I looked at the image before we recorded, but it feels so much more alive now.
I think the reason why I don't like the woman that like the Medusa holding his head is because it doesn't make any sense. She wouldn't need to do that. She could just turn him into fucking stone.
That's true.
Like Medusa doesn't use a sword.
That's a really good point.
It was just provocative to be provocative. It was just but what if Medusa had done it?
Yeah,
I think that's why I didn't like it. It was just derivative in the worst way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't always love, like, what if we fixed it? Like, that always feels a little bit like one note to me. But, Cam, you look like you really want to say something.
Well, I think there's a cool victory for Medusa in that the thing's made out of stone.
Yeah, right? Like,
well, this sculpture is not the Cellini. It's bronze, so...
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Sorry to
never mind.
disappoint you.
The original one is bronze. I think the other one might be stone. I don't know what it is, but like the one of Medusa having, holding Perseus's head.
See, that would be cooler if you did like a series of statues and you didn't actually show Medusa, you just showed like all of her victims.
Like the White Witch's
and
castle in
out.
Narnia?
I don't have a photographic memory of the Narnia movies,
She
Maggie.
turns all of her victims to stone, and they like literally enter the graveyard of all of her victims.
Then yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, you remember Fawn Tumnus
Mr. Tumnus?
in the first one?
Come on,
Oh yes, the scarf.
Yes,
Yes.
and he
There
turns
you
into
go.
stone, and he doesn't get unturned to stone until the end whenever he gets the Jesus flask from the lion god.
Exactly.
And then he becomes Professor X.
Yeah, exactly. This is all the same universe.
Okay, so Cam, what work of art did you choose?
So
Okay, I know his name is Aslan. I was a big fan of those books back in the day. I just had to
no,
Oh yeah,
there.
love those books.
I love the Jesus lion. He's awesome.
So the work of art that I've changed my mind about is Hamlet.
Of course.
And this is sort of a different way of talking about Shakespeare than I usually do. And I saved this one for when Tristan was here because I know a lot of the origin story I'm going to get into. He had the exact same circumstance and teacher, so I wanted him to be able to speak to that. So this is Hamlet. I mean, it needs no introduction. This is the most famous of Shakespeare's plays, and I think
I've never heard of it.
that's sort of the problem here, is that. That's how it's introduced. That's like the exhaustion in my voice there, the reputation preceding it so much. That's what I'm going to get into.
Yeah.
To be or not to be.
Yeah.
Annoyed.
So the first encounter I had with this play, I was, 15 or 16 in high school, and we had this assignment of reading the play, and we're reading it out loud in class, and Tristan, I know you did this too. I believe we were both assigned to read Hamlet's part out loud.
Listen, Ms. Marek, she recognized talent when she saw it.
Yeah, I mean, we were drafted into this, weren't we?
Yes, that's true. We had no choice, but we rose to the occasion, I think.
It's such an interesting, like, anytime you read Shakespeare, I think I read Romeo and Juliet before that.
That's always the first one you read because of all the sex jokes.
And, but on first, I mean, at that age, I wasn't getting half of that either. But
Yeah.
there's so much that you miss. I would say you miss 90% of what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
But the cool thing about Shakespeare, and why I think it's fun as this universal kind of form of art, is that everyone can get something out of it. Yes, we can talk about it endlessly and find all these little layers and rhyme schemes and things, but even on its surface, the plot is cool. Like, the plot of Hamlet's cool, it's accessible. The flourishes, the surreal, why is his dad there as a ghost? That's fun to think about. And then there are knives and swords and accidental killings and fencings and challenges and poison. Like, all of that is cool. And even if you don't get really much of the depth at all of the play, the words are dazzling. And I think that was what first hooked me. And it was the first time I'd ever read a blowout massacre ending in any work of art, and that became my gold standard. That's all I want from every movie, every book, and every show. That's why I didn't like the end of Game of Thrones. I wanted everyone to die. I wanted the final shot to be sweeping over this graveyard as the White Walkers just took control of the world.
I know, I agree.
But Hamlet started that, and I'd never seen anything like that. Horatio, like, having this one guy towards the end who lives to tell the story and everyone else being dead. I thought that was phenomenal. But because we were reading it out loud, I had to grapple with more of the words. And I think it sparked in me the beginning of critical reading and loving that so much.
For sure.
And talking about it with people. Never mind that I met Tristan the next year, but it's the same. It's the same scenario, I think, as sort of what we're doing here. It's why discussion groups are so much fun.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. Like Socratic seminars in high school being like the genesis of us. This is definitely the precursor to what we're doing right now, but also the beginning of our interest in all this stuff.
And how I met both of you in different
true.
scenarios. I met you in a debate class, and I met Maggie in a philosophy class. So both of those are literally Socratic seminars.
Exactly.
But because I was reading Hamlet aloud as, a dumb teenager, Hamlet was just like me. Like, that's all I could see. I wasn't getting what most of the words meant, so I just kind of grafted whatever I was onto him. And he's such a good character for that. He's such a good protagonist because you can see him as a teenager raging against the world and the system. And that's most of what I got out of the text. But the process of reading it out loud and struggling through some lines and then really finding yourself and finding the emotion of a scene in the other ones, there's a magic to that. And that's one of those moments that pushed me to not just love audiobooks, but want to make them. Like, going from being a fan to wondering, I wonder if I could do that. Like, that little flame. I think some of that started there. And the following years of high school and undergrad and grad school and way too much Shakespeare, the reputation of Hamlet started to set in. And Hamlet being the best Shakespeare, the classic work from him, I think that soured the play for me over time. And as I read more Shakespeare, my opinion of Hamlet fell every single time, especially among the tragedies. There's so much, I think, more depth and intrigue and politicking in Richard III or Macbeth or Henry IV, Henry V, King Lear, and then, of course,
Julius Caesar.
Right, too. And then in undergrad, I found Faustus.
Oh,
And that blew all of them out of the water.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I want to go back to Hamlet. I outgrew that shit 10 years ago. And it became... In my head, it became overly simple or familiar or straightforward. Like, that was the easy one. Like, I'm past that now. I'm onto the funky histories that are difficult to understand.
I'm in advanced Shakespeare.
No one could possibly contend with my knowledge of Shakespeare at this point.
And I think the more you read from that period and the more, any sort of drama in the modern age, the more you come in contact with the tropes and cliches that Hamlet invented. But those tropes and cliches can start to overshadow Hamlet as a work. It can become a victim of that many centuries of success. And the play kind of came back to me in my mid-20s. I saw this there's this thing called National Theatre Live, NT Live, where all of these British stage productions, they film with a bunch of cameras and they screen them in movie theaters. And I saw a bunch of them for a couple of years. And one of them was Benedict Cumberbatch as Hamlet. And Ciarán Hinds was Claudius.
Can you remind me who Ciarán Hinds is?
Of course. He's Mance Rayder from Game of Thrones.
Ah, thank you.
Tristan, would you like to say we do not kneel?
We do not kneel.
And I'm going to get to him, but Cumberbatch was so... I mean, obviously I knew him from Sherlock, and I knew him from The Hobbit, and I liked him, and he was probably why I went to this thing. But he revolutionized the character for me, because he's dressed up like this toy soldier kind of nutcracker with these primary colors, and the buttons are too big, and it looks so silly that I stopped seeing him as this noble me as a 14-year-old teenager raging against the world. I saw him as this surviving son. And him putting on the play, him trying to make sense of this nasty world, I started to feel bad for him. Like he was using those tools he had available to him, but he was this stunted adult instead of a noble teenager. I suddenly saw all the fear in the character, and he became this like eternal child who kind of locked down mentally and emotionally when his father died. And he's trying not to understand the dynamics that are now surrounding him. He's trying to make sense of it only in his way, like trying to control the world. There's a tragedy to his character, never mind all the murders that happen around him. It was only after I outgrew my Hamlet that I could look at him fresh.
Oh, cool.
And then Ciarán Hinds, because I'm knee-deep into Game of Thrones, obviously. I'm looking at him, and I'm paying attention to that character for the first time. The first time you read it, he's just the bad guy.
Yeah.
It's same like Disney movies, there's the stepmother, who's bad. Claudius is so much more than that. I mean, he is the bad guy, but he's so bad. And seeing someone like Ciarán Hinds have that wicked snarl of his kind of sideways mouth... he did so much of the work of the play for me. I saw the tension between him and Gertrude. I saw the tension between Hamlet and Gertrude for the first time, and that triangle missing a piece now that Hamlet Sr. is dead. New villains emerged in the play. I saw these resentments and murders, all of these layers that I'd missed, however many times I'd read it before. There was all this acid flowing through the ensemble that I had never seen. And I love this play now, not as the best thing Shakespeare ever made, not as the best Elizabethan tragedy ever made. But for me, I think of Hamlet now as a grindstone. I have that memory of my first impression and how it inspired me. I've got that cautionary tale about outgrowing art. And then, once you pop that bubble and find your humility again, the joys of rediscovery and revisiting an old friend. I'm sure this play will hit me again. And it will hit me differently next time. The density of the text alone almost guarantees that. So I have this respect for Hamlet that I never would have imagined when I was 14. Like, I keep it at arm's length, but I kind of glance at it every couple months.
I like that a lot because I had a similar, like, I really thought Hamlet was, like, the worst one that I had read. Like, still, like, an amazing play because it was Shakespeare. Like, it wasn't like, I can write better. But, like, I was like, I like literally every other Shakespeare play I've read more than this one. But I'd like to go back and visit
Every
it.
single one?
Of all the ones I've read, yeah. I've read some knockout Shakespeare.
She's read 3
I've read that and King Lear.
I mean, I haven't read as much Shakespeare as Cam has, but I've read some Shakespeare, and I liked everything else more. But I'd like to go back and revisit it and see how I feel about it now. I also don't know the last adaptation. I haven't seen many adaptations. I mostly just read it in school. And I've seen, like,
just
clips.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about adaptations of it generally.
Well, yeah. I mean, I haven't ever seen it performed live.
Well,
and anything I've seen is just like clips from, like David Tennant. And
yeah,
stuff.
exactly. David Tennant and Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah.
Those were the big ones for our generation.
Yeah.
I think, especially with Doctor Who and all that. But honestly, the last adaptation you saw of Hamlet was The Northman.
Yeah. Tristan,
I don't know
did you
if
see
you've-
The Northman?
That's not one that I have seen.
Oh.
I know of it, and I know we wanted to see it together, but like
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
Next time we hang out, we're gonna watch that movie, and then we can talk about it. I won't say anything more, but there's a lot of
Oh,
Hamlet in there.
I'm sorry. I have seen a great adaptation of Hamlet. Do you know what it is? It's The Lion King.
Well, I knew you were going to say The Lion King. Boo.
Cam, how do you feel about The Lion King
I think
as
it's
an
the worst
adaptation?
Disney movie.
Oh my God, you're so wrong.
It's also a bad version of Hamlet.
No, it's the best.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Long live the king.
No, but that's a really interesting perspective on Hamlet. When did you see that Benedict Cumberbatch? You said a few years ago?
Mid-20s, something like that.
Okay, yeah. The mid-1920s.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Tristan, what was your experience with Hamlet, given that we had such parallel tracks?
I mean, I would say that I'm pretty much in the same boat. I haven't revisited a lot of Shakespeare since high school. I mean, we had a little bit in the classes that we were in together, and obviously, adaptations of it are everywhere. So it's been present, but I mean, the source material I have not really revisited in a very long time. So I think if I were to view it now, you talking about you growing out of your initial impression. I'm sure I've done that. I just don't really know what the other side of that looks like at this point. Just like, the Perseus sculpture, I'm going to have a different reaction to every piece of that play than I did, in 2013. Right?
Yeah. I mean, Kim, your like experience of Hamlet, I think, is similar to how I was viewing Picasso as like, oh yes, it's like overrated, right?
Right.
Like, because when you're 21, 22, and your brain is still finishing up, you know enough to know how to think critically and have your own opinion, but you still are learning quite a lot. And so you look at something like Picasso or Hamlet, you're like, everyone says it's great, but I think actually that Estella was better. Like, because you want to be like contrarian and have your own opinion and not just what everybody says is great.
Yeah.
It's only when you're older and you are able to look at things in a different way, you're like, that is actually pretty great.
It's like I'm noticing this with the way Tristan talked about the statue as well. It's like this adolescent impulse that everyone in human history has had.
Yeah.
In the same way you like outgrow your parents and start being mean to them.
Yeah.
Like you outgrow this art and you start thinking, oh well, the Hunger Games, that was for babies. You're like 17, you've got pimples everywhere.
Or like hating Twilight when you're 16.
Yes,
and now I'm
exactly.
like 29 and I love Twilight because it's absurd.
And you
know?
find this patience later.
Yeah.
That lets you look at things in a much more even way.
When you look at something like Hamlet, right? You get to have a more even-handed approach nowadays. Having put a lot more years under your belt, you've got a different perspective on things, and you can revisit it and say, "Hey, I feel this way about it now." But the Perseus statue catches me off guard because I find that I miss my initial interpretation. I wish that I could view it the way that I did back then whenever it was simpler, because it was more special to me. It felt more important to me and like something that I could derive some inspiration from.
I think it's super interesting. Tristan's is a different example than ours, because when Hamlet as a book is just sitting there and I open it fresh, I can find whatever I want in there. Maybe I'll be reminded of my old opinions and interpretations, but it's sort of just fresh and as is. But because Tristan bought into the way that the Perseus sculpture seems to represent Perseus and the nobility of this victory, every time you look at that statue now, I mean, you're immediately reminded of how you used to see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a monument to that first impression.
And it's funny, the what you guys are expressing about Hamlet and other Shakespearean works right now is of a relationship that matures over time. What mine feels like is that I had a bad breakup, and I can't look at it without being reminded of the past and like the positive things that I felt about it back then, but knowing that I can't ever go back to that because something about it is toxic.
Yeah. So
right?
you just need to find a new Perseus is what it is.
Well, exactly, right? But I'm so far removed from the naivete that allowed me to view it that way. I miss the pureness of that.
The simplicity.
Because it's different. It's difficult for me to view anything now as purely good or purely bad. I don't know that you can really make those value judgments about art anymore. I can recognize that the Perseus is a beautifully made statue, and its ability to evoke emotion is very impressive. But in terms of what it stands for and what it means, I can't just allow myself to think one thing at the expense of ignoring the other glaring issue that I have with it.
Yeah, that's hard. Well,
What would the feeling, if you made that picture your phone background now, what would the feeling be every time you had to unlock your phone?
It would be I'd be conflicted. I would be, because I would look at it, and it would just, again, it would be a reminder that I've had to change my opinion. Nobody told me to. Nobody. I feel morally obligated to feel a different way out of, just from my core and the core of my being. And it's just a natural thing that I really can't undo. Again, I can still appreciate the work. It just doesn't mean the same thing or have the same power to me that it used to.
I like any time any work of art can make you feel helpless. I feel like it's easier to talk about that with movies because the doors are locked and the lights are off. Like it's controlling.
It's just going.
Your other senses are controlled variables in that scenario. But in a museum, especially, I mean, they always cram statues into the corner, and there are a billion of them stacked up with no explanation.
Yeah.
I love that this one can keep you enthralled.
I am not a fan of like sculptures. That's not my chosen art form, right? I can't think of another physical piece of art like that I've been so captured or engrossed by. And that's why this was the first. I don't know that I can think of a piece of art that has enabled that I can trace a journey like that I can with this one for. There's just nothing that rivals that to me.
I feel like that's the era we're in of this show. The kind of stuff we talk about, it's difficult art. I think that's the stuff that's really catching my interest lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we won't get into it, but it's, the Picasso painting, there are layers and layers of misogyny and, like I said earlier, colonialism in there. That's like, ugh. But it's like you look at it in a way that it's just making you think, and it's making you question things, and it's conflicting and contradictory and confusing and upsetting, and it just makes you think.
And it's directly starting a conversation about ugliness.
Yeah.
Or attractiveness or aesthetics.
Or overcoming obstacles or misogyny.
Comparing women.
Yeah. Or, beating up your stepdad. Or whatever. So, yeah. Yeah.
You know what? I think also maybe one of the things that like irks me about it is that my opinion changed and I didn't do anything to change it. It was not of my own accord.
You weren't
that
like, let me
occurred.
rethink this. Yeah.
Yeah. It just happened, and I had to confront that about myself, right? Or like confront that interpretation with myself. This sounds so like grandiose, as if like this was a big life-changing thing. I mean, like to an extent, yeah, because it makes you think about the fact that your opinions change, and like you extrapolate that to everything else. But I mean, this wasn't that deep, right? It's just one piece of art. But just the impact there and the reasoning behind it, not really, sort of being out of control or not being in control of steering where that interpretation goes. It's humbling in that it's a reminder that even the greatest interpretation or analysis is a fleeting thing. And, it's a positive and a negative, right? Because it validates the things that we're doing here, right? Why have a podcast about art? Well, because we might not have these thoughts by ourselves or even with each other. We set up this exigence to have this conversation, and you don't know what's going to spring up out of it, right? And so it's like it's hopeful. But then you also have to acknowledge the other side where, once you get to the other side of the conversation or the interpretation or your journey with that piece of art, maybe you don't like where you end up versus where you started.
Yeah, definitely.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's very cool that we had like the same conversation in 3 different mediums. Because
very fun.
like podcasting is a modern medium that deserves no respect. But like compared to the old
True.
ones,
Honestly, yeah.
like the old mediums that we're talking about, which have become this like thumbnail kind of shortcut for, well, this is a classic thing we should respect, whether it's paintings or sculptures or even like philosophy we've discussed. I mean, all of Plato is just the transcript of podcasts. It's just them getting hammered and talking about things.
So you're saying we are like Plato?
I'm saying that it's an impulse that the idea Tristan brought up of ideas that only come out in conversation, that you can't think of alone. That is the utility of communicating mammals.
Yeah. Or even just like the desire to record and document the thought and interpretation you're having now.
The struggle.
I mean, like you were saying about how like all Van Goghs to you look like him working out an idea.
Yeah.
Like even if how he feels about a jar of sunflowers isn't how he feels about it tomorrow,
right.
He captured how he felt about it today, and we can decide how we feel about it today and tomorrow and yesterday.
Yeah.
And when there's soup on
We are reaching into the ether of thought and pulling out the ephemeral.
Well, that was fun.
That was
Art
fun.
we've changed our mind about number 1, episode 1, whatever we're going to call it. But yeah,
we're
this
gonna do more of this. Will be fun.
little Friday segment. Cool.
All right.
Maggie,
That's fun.
you want to do some plugs, Maggie?
I already did the plugs.
Yes, you
But
did.
I was,
got it out of the
but I
way
was
whenever
cackling
she-
through them. Let's
Whenever
remind.
she expressed her disdain at curing
Gosh, I
cancer.
just can't. Ugh, disgusting. No, ugh.
Yeah, second breakfast pod everywhere.
Yeah. If you have a work of art that you changed your mind about, or you, like me, think Les Demoiselles was really ugly, then let's tell me about it.
No, she lost
What?
confidence in Russ throat.
I lost it. Okay.
Take me seriously.
If you think that we should behead all women, send us an email. It's secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com.
Done.
All right, cool.
Okay.
See you on Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.